Okay, well, hello everyone. This is Thomas Juli from Motivate to Be, and I welcome you to the ninth episode of the online dialogue, Love, Life, and Work in a Human World. And today we're talking about maybe a rather sad subject. We have a funeral. It's death of HR. And this has been, a topic I always wanted to talk about for quite some time. Because I have been very skeptical of the term HR, and so I'm very happy to welcome our special guest Sue Bingham from Georgia in the United States. Sue is the founder and principal of the HPWP Group, and she has been at the forefront of the positive business movement for 35 years. Her life's work has been to create high-performing workplaces by partnering with courageous leaders who value the contributions of team members. And she's also an author of a best-selling Amazon book called Creating the High-Performance Workplace. It's not complicated to develop a culture of commitment. And she's also contributing author of the internationally best-selling book From Hierarchy to High Performance. Hello, Sue, and welcome.
Hi, thank you very much.
Maybe first you can say a few words, where you're coming from before I dive into the first question, and we'll just go from
there. Well, I started a long time ago, many decades ago, in the human resources field, and it was really a great opportunity because I worked in a very large aerospace company, and I had responsibility for 3,000 employees, salaried employees. Well, initially I had 700 or 800, but it was also a union company, and so there was a labor side to it as well. And I worked there for 10 years, and there were lots of, I found myself at a very young age issuing disciplinary warnings to adults who, were my parents' age, and it never felt right. I didn't understand why. Sometimes the purpose of the discipline was ridiculous. It was simply a miscommunication or something like that, and yet I was required as part of my job to have it in writing and have people sign it and things like that. So that was my first real exposure to that aspect of human resources. Now, the other side, the training piece and so on, I really loved and enjoyed. But the focus, there were many policies because the company didn't spend the time to train managers or work with them or talk with them about how do you lead people and how do you interact with people. And so as a result, there was no trust for the management. So the idea was we have to have a very big policy manual, and we have to have a very large HR group to police this in order to make sure managers don't say something wrong and get the company into legal trouble. So that was my first really 10 years, and half of it was wonderful and half of it really bothered me. And at some point in time, I had a mentor, like many of us have had, who came in and taught me that the old way of having all the policies was silly, that everything we were doing was focused on a small minority of people when the vast majority of people were really good, and we were ignoring them, and not only that, holding them accountable to the same policies we're using to try to catch the bad apples. And once he showed me and taught me a system whereby we could completely upend HR as it was, I never went back. And so even after I stopped working for companies, I formed a small group of really passionate, a couple of them are here, passionate folks who believe that HR as the policy police, as those who need to manage a discipline process and those kinds of things, that's not value added. and mitigating risk isn't value added. And most people, unfortunately, when they hear the term HR, at least this is my experience, sort of groan. And yet we've got great people in this profession. It's just that the profession has sort of taken on a profile that we don't add value. And in fairness, in a lot of HR departments don't. They don't add value because they're in a box there, which is mitigating risk. So that's my rant. I think we've got really good people who have, as a profession, we've been trained, we've been certified to mitigate risk. And in the process of mitigating risk, we have sacrificed culture, adding value, focusing on the 95% of really good people and making things open to them. It couldn't be more obvious than in the COVID-19 now with the remote workforce. So many people have resisted remote, and I've had many people tell me, that many smart leaders say to me that, you know, working remotely or flexibly is a privilege. You know, you need to earn it. And I don't get that. I mean, we're talking about adults that have been recruited, and you know, many times we're paying a good salary, good pay to, and to think that we don't trust them. And of course, all the research and statistics says that people are more productive at home often. So anyway, that's my rant.
Okay. So you really liked working in that profession, and then yet, you know, I've invited you to speak this online dialogue where we talk about death of the HR. So basically, in other words, I'm asking you to give a funeral speech. So since this is a funeral, looking back, when you look at your career, has it been with a crying or with a laughing eye? Given it's a funeral, you know.
That's a really good question. I would say that I feel I'm laughing at a lot of the experience that I've had, but very sad that the old HR hasn't died yet. You know, it's still alive and well and flourishing in lots of companies, and it needs to change. It needs to go away. And I know there's many good people that recognize that, but they don't know how. They don't know, well, if my role is not writing policies and policing them and so on, what is my role? And there's a very clear role for people who have facilitation skills and the interest in learning and a desire to create a workplace where people are trusted. There's a wonderful role for that.
So when you say, well, the old HR is still around, I mean, basically, maybe we talk about zombies, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, the question is like, and also I have a tendency, I talk about HR, even though I don't want to talk about HR, because the term HR, human resources, it's wrong. But the question, like, what would be a good term? But it's just like people and success, people and culture. Is it human being? Is it human potential? I mean, we do need to have a term, don't we? But what would you propose?
Oh my gosh. You know, whatever we propose will sound trite after a while. There've been so many that are giving to it. When I think of it, I think of the role. I'm not giving it a name yet, but I think of the role. I think of someone who's a catalyst, who's a facilitator, and who is the conscience of the company. Because what we found is many good, thoughtful leaders are still held to, you know, quarterly earnings and things like that. And sometimes, especially based on background, you can have a knee-jerk reaction and a downturn on things like that. And that's not, it takes somebody that's there as part of that team to say, is that really part of who we are? is that part of our culture? Do we really want to send that message, or is there something else we should do differently? So from my mind, it's really sort of the standard bearer or conscience of the company's value for people. If the company sincerely values its people, it's the person that's the advocate and conscious about it.
I love this. So you said like you don't want to say it, propose a term yet, but what do you propose? Is there anything, what's your favorite? I mean, if you're, with your own company, it's like, what would you, I mean, or you say, I have a company, and say, okay, I understand, I don't like this classical HR anyway. So what should I call our team? Are we the catalyst? Are we the human catalyst, or who are we? What's our new name?
I'll go with human catalyst, Thomas.
Okay. So HC, okay, let's talk about HC, human catalyst. Okay, wonderful, that's great. So, well, you already hinted as like when you became estranged with HR, you know, but I mean, this is kind of like, this didn't happen overnight. And I'm interested, maybe you can still tell us about your personal, how should I say, eureka, if there was an incident and how you cope with it.
Well, it really goes back to that first thing I was describing. And my very first week at this company, the company had lost a major contract, a government contract. And so we had to lay off about 30 engineers. And at that time, since we didn't trust managers to talk to their employees, they got sent to HR. And so every 15 minutes, I had an engineer come into my office. This is my first week, and let them know that they didn't have a job, essentially, and that they were being laid off. And it was 2 to 3 full days of doing that. Later, when I had learned more and was smarter and more experienced, we were able to effect a trade with other aerospace companies and subcontractors, because when one goes down, that means the other one got it. So we were able to lease out our employees, our engineers, and still let them keep their service and benefits and so on. That was really unheard of in the industry, but it was the right thing to do. And it occurred to me that we just don't, my husband's fond of saying that thinking is really hard work. If it wasn't, we'd see more of it. And there just isn't, I wasn't seeing the thinking. I was seeing the plow through step by step and not getting creative. And this was, you know, decades ago. And so I was fortunate at that time to meet this mentor who was opening new plants. Everybody was all salaried. They had almost no turnover. Their quality, their safety, every aspect was extremely high. And it was very trusting. And if somebody dropped a $50 bill on the floor, some employee would pick it up and take it somewhere or put it on a bulletin board. I mean, it was that level of trust and performance. And those plants that were opened with that philosophy outperformed the big company where I was working, the parent plant, outperformed them 3 times. So it was all about people. They didn't have newer equipment necessarily or anything else. It was that the focus was people are capable of far more, and let's have high expectations, and let's remember that we're dealing with adults, not kids, and have adult conversations if there's a problem. It's just common sense, but common sense isn't so common, right?
Yeah, unfortunately not. Did you have any role models who helped you along the way?
Well, certainly my mentor did.
Yeah.
Because what was good about that is he was tough. I mean, we're not talking about someone who doesn't have high expectations. And boy, when you went in to see him with an issue, you were expected to have a potential solution and how you might execute that. And he was you know, famous for looking at someone after they'd done a project and saying, is this your best work? And it wasn't to run the person down. It was to say, you're capable of so much, you know, raise the bar. So the thing I learned about it is that HR, he was HR, he was a director of human resources. And he also negotiated the labor agreement. So he was like a split personality. But one of the things that he said is that we just need to do the right thing and think, and we can be tough, and we should have high expectations. But it wasn't that soft, touchy-feely stuff. Mm-hmm. It was respect. It was true value for people. That was the difference, I guess. So that when I watched that you can be strong and direct at the same time as caring and valuing people, that was the model that helped guide me.
That's, well, like I said, it's common sense, but it's common practice. And interesting, a couple of years ago, I read a book, How NASA Builds Teams. And one of the critical success factors was actually respect. So it had nothing to do with technology. It's like more like how the people are being treated, clear roles and responsibilities, which were adapted, but it's basically about respect. So you can actually build a team and trust. And you see the whole person, not like a cost factor, not just a human resource. And so that's cool. Well, I mean, this is not really new. I mean, what you have experiencing, this has been some time ago, and yet right now, I'm also claiming that, well, classical HR is dead. Now during the Corona crisis, even more so. But why do you think even more so, or is it nothing new? What's so special then about the Corona crisis that actually could catalyze, I guess, a change?
Well, it depends on what happens when we go back and how we go back. That's my biggest fear. In fact, we started a blog that said, don't go back. This coronavirus fast forwarded the need to trust people. I mean, there was no choice about sending people home. There was no choice about remote workers. And my strong hope is that leaders and managers are seeing that this is workable and doable. And I asked, one of the poll questions was, I'd be really interested in what our group thinks here too, is right now, once people can return to the work site, and I'm talking now office employees because many of the production employees in essential business have been there. But once people can return to the work site, if they say, I've been able to do my job from home, can't I just continue to do that? What will be the response? And my fear is the response will be that management will get together, senior management will get together with HR. They'll create a policy.
HC, we call them HC.
Well, but it's going to be HR.
Okay.
But I mean, I hope it's HC. Yeah. But they're going to get together with that person, with that group, and they're going to come up with some kind of structure and policy. Instead of each leader right now having a conversation with all their team members, which hopefully they are, because communication is so important during this, that the leader should be talking with their folks and saying, hey, you know, we're going to go back to a new normal. How's it been for you working at home? What's worked? What hasn't? Where do you feel most effective? What do you need from me? All those conversations could be taking place right now, and I hope they are. I'm concerned they're not, but if they're taking place, then we've really made a big leap forward in the trust area, in the recognizing people as adults and responsible adults. We'll have made a big leap. If we try to control it and we try to structure it and sort of one size fits all, then we haven't gained anything.
Would you agree that there's a possible impediment for this to take place, what you have just described? And that is like businesses go back into business and they say, okay, what we have to do right now in order to survive, we have to generate revenue, so short run perspective, so we don't have time for this dialogue. How do you overcome what if I'm like the devil's advocate, and I'm just saying this, okay, everything is fine, I believe you, but right now, listen, we have to earn money the next 3 months, and then once we've done this, we can talk about this. How would you respond?
Well, I've been in those conversations many times, and the role again is to challenge. Do we think that this group here is capable of making all this income? Or do we rely on our workforce to do it? And if we rely on our workforce, don't we think they want the same thing? So if we communicate really clearly, here's our gap, here's our financial gap, here's what we're dealing with, we need your involvement, we need your help. The high performance companies that have that culture that I've worked with, people are so tuned in to the company's finances and what needs to be done that they just do it. They don't need to be told. They feel an ownership, and they have a stake in the company's success. And I think sometimes management starts thinking employees don't have that same stake in the company's success. I don't know where that comes from, but I think they don't realize that.
Well, I think that has been doing something with this hierarchy, with the Tayloristic world, every top down, the top knows best, and the bottom is like, okay, they're just workers, and they don't know anything. But what you're actually saying, involve your people, because who knows, maybe they know more than you do, and but involving them also requires that they have to identify with the purpose or with the stake of the company. And which in this case, if that has not been in place before, I guess that company is in jeopardy anyway, I guess, So going out of, the post-COVID world, what kind of leaders do we need then?
Well, I work with a group, a couple of them are on this call. We've been working together for the last 6 years. I think our new name is Alliance for Connected Leaders, but we believe that the leaders of the future obviously need to be able to balance the need for success and profitability with creativity and with humanity. And the humanity piece of it is, again, where the HC comes in as a key player to balance out if we go too far to the focus on profit or focused on operations. I want to say, the companies that are high performance are focused on how do we maximize our people, not focused on how do we maximize our profits, because the people will do that. And I know that that's been around forever. I think the problem is that because of the Taylor style management and the command and control, people have learned to be robots. They've learned to be survivors. They've learned to say, okay, well, I'm not really valued here. I'm a part in a cog. So I'll come in and I'll do my job and I'll go home. And I think that when leaders see that, they make the assumption that that's who that person really is and that they don't care. And that person would be entirely different if you put them in an environment where they were valued.
Mm. Well, even though when you say maximizing people, to me, okay, my background is in economics, so I say, okay, cool, great, I like this, maximizing, it's optimizing profits. Okay, then we optimize people. Is this what you're talking about? I mean, what do you mean by maximizing people? Is there like are we going 100%? Are we going 70%? Or let me phrase it this way. What does it take to unfold the human potential in a company?
To let go of command and control, to have trust, to hire really good people, give them the information and the support they need. It's that simple. It's just that simple. But there's, you know, all these assumptions built in. Again, Taylor's assumptions that you know, we can't trust people, we can't do this, and we apply those to everybody, and we create an environment where people just come in and do what they're told to do. And I know many managers who've said, look, I need to swim below the water level. They're in management positions, and sometimes higher level management positions, and you just don't rock the boat. You got to swim under the wave and be hidden. And so that fear and all these zombies we've created over decades have now become what's accepted to be the norm by traditional management. And so there's a feeling that we've got to control them, because otherwise they won't do anything.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, yeah, we still have zombies around, but the question is like, okay, say last week we also had some students, you know, they were actually working on a business degree, and some of them were interested in focusing on HR, which we call HC. I mean, what would you recommend that they actually should focus on? Should they get like a traditional HR degree, or should they pick a different major? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I feel strongly about that. We have certification programs here in the States that are really focused on compliance and risk mitigation, and lots of people have them, and that perpetuates the old HR. I think if you look at organizational development, I think you look at business. I think you look at, it's now at a time where there's so much great information available through podcasts, through reading, through articles, through whatever, that you become a human researcher in your own fashion, and learn. I didn't get an MBA. I have just a bachelor's degree in communications. But if you've got a passion for something, you learn about it. And I think certification, the way it's done here for HR, is not helpful. And yet it's been held out as, you know, boy, if you've got that SHRM or that HCI certificate, that makes you much more employable. And for me, when I would see that, it made me think, uh-oh, you know, this is somebody that's going to need a lot of reprogramming.
Training of zombies, not good. Well, the question is like, then one last question before I open the floor for everyone to dive in. When we talk about trust, we talk about high performance, respect, etc. Is there actually still a need to measure, say, trust, or if how would it be possible to measure trust? Is it a good idea in the first place?
Well, you can see trust in every measure. You know, every measure. If you have a high trust environment, it's going to show up in every measure that you have. You know, when people trust, it's no holds barred, and mistakes are identified. People move forward. There's collaboration. There aren't silos. There's not the bureaucracy. I mean, think of the amount of bureaucracy created by a lack of trust. You have trust and you eliminate the bureaucracy, you've increased the speed of everything, as well as the quality of everything. So to me, now we also, because trust is one of our elements of the high performance operating system, we're able to measure trust as part of a survey that we do, where we ask people to give examples of behaviors that demonstrate trust, and we have them rate at 1 to 5. And in the high performance companies where we've worked, trust is always like a 4.8 or a 5. I mean, it's extremely high, and every metric in that company is high, except for turnover and absenteeism, which are really low. And by the way, high performance companies don't have sick pay. They don't have PTO. They don't have any of that. They just expect everybody to come to work, like we do managers. And if a problem shows up, you know, if somebody starts missing a bunch of time and there's not enough communication about it, there's an adult conversation. expecting the person to solve it. But and one of the things that you find is people, if you've got 5 days sick leave, people feel like almost you need to take that. If you say, hey, we expect you here every day, and yeah, if you're sick, we'll compensate you for that. We understand that happens, but we expect you here every day. It's just adults dealing with adults.
Dealing with adults, wonderful. Well, there are still so many questions I like to ask, but on the other side, since it's a dialogue, I'd like to invite everyone else here on the call to dive in. And
I can
Christopher
ask the first. Thank you so much for sharing. So that is so interesting. I was just thinking, isn't it actually the question of end of leadership in a sense? I was just reading this book by Barbara Kellerman, and she says it's the end of leadership. That is actually the reason why HR is dying.
A couple of things. That's a really great comment. One of the things that we believe is that if you've got the mindset that human resources is a leadership responsibility, it's not a department, it's not a function, it's not a profession. I believe that, and I worked with a company where the entrepreneur who started it and built an amazing company didn't have any HR to speak of, and he had, it was 6,000 employees, and he said, I expect my leaders to take care of this. Now, he hadn't done a lot of leadership training, so that's why I was there, but that was his expectation. He said, I don't want a department where people come to complain. If they've got an issue, they talk to their leader. So I think HR became a big function because of, at least in this country, all of the litigation and the cost of the litigation, and that's pretty scary. Some of those numbers are very high, and so we needed people, or the companies leaders felt they needed people who were really able to navigate that and mitigate that risk. And that's how we got down this downward slide and into being the HR police. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Now, I mean, you were talking about this top-down management, and I often say that pyramids, if you build pyramids, you can expect mummies.
That's a really good thing to say. Can I steal that? I really like that.
So
yeah.
how to enliven these mummies? I mean, because if you're a mummy, you're not very productive, right? So right. There's a huge potential in allowing people to become alive and bring their whole self to work.
I really like that. I've got to steal that. One of the things we say in our workshop is that if we hear something really good, we credit the person who said it for 2 weeks, and after that, it's ours.
Great, wonderful. Anyone else? Again, you have to unmute. You can unmute yourself.
We've got, I know on here, we've got a couple of HR people who are not your typical HR people. We've had them speak at a number of our dinners. Kat and Becca, they work for a company in Texas. They absolutely live and breathe HR adding value, and are the models for what, in my opinion, HR should be. We still need some of the profession. We still need that coordination, that consciousness, the training and development, but they practice every day, reminding everyone and working with the leaders that these are adults.
Good point. Well, I was like, before we started this dialogue today, you said like, well, it's so easy to blame HR, but it's not really the people, because we have some good people. It's more of that we look at the system or the tradition, you can say, heavy, legacy, not necessarily good legacy. Question then, of course, how do we get closer to the tipping point of turning HR into HC?
That's one of the things my little company's been trying to do for 30 years. I think it's simply through education, through writing, through blogging, through podcasts, through whatever we can do. And when we find those courageous leaders in those companies that are willing to say, hey, I'm willing to take some risks for a better culture. And I really value the people at every level. When we find those courageous leaders, making an example of them as we do. I mean, I think we do that now, but I think we just continue to do that, and we continue to focus on those leaders who make a difference through how they lead their people.
Okay.
I'd like to comment. Thank you, Sue, so much. Your story seems so familiar to me, and yet it's from a different, discipline, HR, HC, but the challenge seems so similar, and we talk a lot, and when I say we, I talk about, so I've come into business transformation from the agile world, which typically starts with delivery, and not so much with the policy and the typical HR area, and yet what you're talking about is a mindset shift that we did, what I describe and you describe. I think you've even reversing the pyramid or having adult conversations or flattening the organization, all these kinds of things. And you mentioned, for example, believing that the people closer to the work actually have more knowledge of what's going on. And in the agile space, I've noticed with the conflict with traditional management and with the agile subculture is such a different approach, So in the agile space, we talk about that the people having knowledge of the work run across impediments to their work, and the ones that they can't solve, we have processes for them to escalate those, right? And so we're trusting. So management's role changes, as opposed to saying, this is how you do it, to this is how I'm going to solve your impediments to you doing your work that have emerged as you've been doing it, and that is like a completely different direction, and I'm just wondering, how do you overcome these kinds of mindset shifts? Because they're really, our friend Steve Denning, he's described it as the Copernican revolution of management. It's like a paradigm shift. And I hear you say you work with the willing, which is probably a good start, right? Than the unwilling. So people that are brave enough to take these steps and are willing. But I find that even people that are willing, and sometimes they read a McKinsey article, and we used to joke, McKinsey says 30% of companies are going to be agile. So the management who read that said to their staff, make 30% of our company agile, because that's the trend now, and we got to support that, to our shareholders and whatnot. But without any knowledge of really what they're embarking upon, even willing leaders sometimes have to be transformed, in their thinking, and it can take some time. So I just wonder what you're.
Well, we're all the result of our frame of reference is all the result of our experience and what our experience has been. And my experience early on was that the traditional HR didn't feel right. Didn't feel right for me. and it had to be different. Something needed, there needed to be a better way. I think people need, I think that it takes some experiential learning. One of the things, we have a 5-day leadership workshop, and we get a lot of pushback from prospects and potential people that said 5 days, 5 days, you don't need 5 days. And we say, well, it's not till the 3rd day that we see people start to change their mind. It takes, most people enter the class if they're coming from a command and control environment, and many of them are, and they come with their arms crossed, and you say, how come you're here? And it's, well, because my boss sent me. And they got their arms crossed, and they're waiting to sit through 5 days of what they fear will be a lecture. And I don't think people can learn. I don't think you can change mindsets through simply reading. I think you have to experience it. It has to impact you in some way. It has to be emotional. And so throughout those 5 days, we use experiences that cause people to say, they come to their own conclusion. They have their own mindset change. And when they leave, they think differently, they feel differently, and accordingly, they behave differently. But it takes an emotional, I believe it takes, you've got to take people through some kind of an emotional experience to get a mindset change. Did I answer your question, or did I just babble on again?
Okay. You have to unmute yourself. 1 sec. Oh, 1 sec. Doesn't. Oh. Okay. Oops. Yeah. Now you can speak. Jake.
Yes, you did. That's all I really wanted to say. Yeah. So the experiential piece, I think, is key. So I think there's something there. It was the old Einstein quote, right? It's the thinking that got us here isn't the thinking that's gonna get us there. So some kind of shift still, in your years and decades of experience, some kind of shift has to occur. And then my experience with those is that people can step into that other part of the brain or whatever that shift is, but then the old habits come back, or the pressure from the environment will provoke it and reward the old way of thinking. And so then what do you do to keep the to reinforce the new?
Well, I think,
and embed it into the organization and people's minds.
I don't think it's going to be optional. It's just a matter of timing. I think the workforce is changing, continues to change. Technology continues to change. The future of work continues to change. All those things are going to continue to drive companies to make changes to how they work. And it's my belief that successful companies will do it recognizing the humanity and what humanity has to bring to it. I think those who don't will struggle. And there's a statistic I read that said that of the S&P 500, the average tenure for those companies was something like 67 years. The average tenure for those companies now is 15. I don't think the companies that resist and stay stuck are going to have an option. They're just going to be slower, and it's going to hurt them.
So your belief is that the market, so to speak, will reward the new?
I believe it will. Who of these new generations wants to go work for a company that says, I want you in your seat at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you get in 45 minutes for lunch, and you can leave at 5, and you get X number of days off, and you know, they're just, I just don't, especially as remote working has become more prevalent, I think companies are going to struggle to find. I mean, the toughest, most competitive market was IT, and they flexed. You know, they had to flex, and I think that's going to be true of other companies as we go along. And I've worked largely in manufacturing, and manufacturing is has been, you know, almost total command and control right from the Taylor days. But I've also seen it transformed with the right leader, and seen almost 0% turnover, and people who worked in what were hourly paid positions. They're salaried, they're non-exempt, but those people love to come to work, feel totally free. I know one guy said, I asked a group of 5 employees one time in a panel that worked for a high performance workplace, well, you guys could be supervisors or managers in another company. Why don't you do that? And they said, what, and give up the freedom we have now? You know, the power, the authority, we don't want to do that.
Mm.
Nice.
Yeah. Jay, you talked about agile. Actually, I believe, and sometimes you have companies, they say, well, yeah, we're agile. We have agile HR, and I already explained it in a brief post yesterday. When there's a company, they say we have agile HR. It's fake agile because they're still talking about resources. On the other hand, if they embrace agile, I think it can make a huge difference in turning a company into something much bigger and really unfolding the potential and allowing this company to become something what I call a human business. Agile by itself, it will not do the trick, or actually maybe they have agile plus human catalyst, and then you get something much bigger. But just agile, it's not sufficient anymore these days, because when you look at Apple, you look at Amazon, you know, and they're all agile, very agile companies. They are far from being human companies or human businesses. Why? Because they still have a tendency to treat at least some people like resources, so they don't get it. So agile is not by itself, it's not sufficient. You know, a couple of years ago, would not have said this, but you know, at this point, it's I don't know. Well, would you agree, or would you qualify the statement? What do you say?
On the agile piece?
Either way, yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree. You know, my the head of a division that provides agile services at a large consulting company, which will go unnamed, used to joke that the way that he sells agile transformation to top management is, hey, it's the best way to exploit your workforce. Why wouldn't you do it? You know, it works. It gets people engaged. They're more committed. They're going to be more productive. And you know, it was a provocative statement, but he also found it to be somewhat true. You know, and I think if you look, and I don't know Amazon personally, but I think if we look at the press, we can see what you're talking about, Thomas, right? Which is that in where it was useful to exploit the workforce, in the knowledge workers that are developing the software, they're quite agile. They're very team-oriented, you know, the 2-pizza thing and all that stuff that Bezos has talked about. But then when you look at the warehouses, they're human resource, you know, the robots and the people are treated, you know, equally. And the more they can have robots to replace the people, the on and on it goes, you know. So yeah, I don't know what the easy answers are, you know. That's why I think these kinds of conversations are so powerful, because we come across disciplines, and as a team, you know, as a group of people going to the world that have different lenses, maybe we can, you know, do the full transformations.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to be a louder voice. I think one of the things we wanted to do was challenge more. I mean, I think we need to actually make some people angry at some of the things we're saying in order to prompt some of the thinking that needs to come with it. As I've gotten older, I figured, well, I'm old enough now. I can be direct. I can say what I want to say, and it helps because I can challenge someone who's a client, who's an owner of a business, and who says, hey, I want to do some more leadership training, and I could say, no, I don't think so, because right now you haven't done anything, you haven't led in a way that's maximized the training your people have received so far. And he said, well, I've got an HR person to do that. And I said, no, it's a leadership responsibility. And as long as you think that, you know, you're wasting your money. Not only that, we're making very disgruntled managers because they come back from a workshop all excited, and then they run into the same obstacles. But I think we start saying, I remember working at that very large company. There were lots of people who who were just fine with the status quo, and trying to change their minds was hard and time consuming. And you have to focus on where there's an openness and a willingness, and challenge and really work those folks. I feel pretty comfortable ignoring the companies that don't want to listen. I mean, there's nothing I can do to change that. You know, we can write articles, we can do that, but and you know, we'd be wealthy. I mean, this would be my podcast. we'd be wealthy if there were more people out there that felt this way, but there aren't. But we keep looking for them and doing everything we can to make them successful.
I also know, Robert, I know that you're also on the call, and you have actually also done some research on the, how should I say, the systemic view of not just HR and business. And you actually also talked a bit more some of the systemic forces. Maybe you can share a few things, what you had in mind and what you found out in your research, if you don't mind. That's Robert Fuchs.
Oh, tell me that again. I'm sorry, Thomas, that was...
Robert Fuchs, from a colleague of mine, he has done research on some systemic, systemic reasons for a certain behavior, and what, you know, how to change this behavior. And I was hoping that maybe your cousin Robert can throw in some pieces of food for us. If he's still on the call, I know that he's there, but I'm not sure if he can listen.
Well, I don't know if I keep trying to keep it simple. Mindset changes behavior. Experience changes mindset. Creating those circumstances where people think and feel differently will change their behavior. It's the difference between commitment and compliance. You know, we sort of teach that. If people are expected to comply, they will. You watch them. You have mechanisms and systems in place to reinforce that. Commitment takes longer because now, as an accountable adult, I'm making the decision that this is what I want to do. And what we want are committed people. What that requires is taking the time up front to recognize the individuality, the uniqueness of people, and recognizing that we've got to create those experiences that cause them to change their mindset and their behavior. So I don't know if that sounded as simple as it is to me, but
well, it does sound simple. The question is this: like, would you have anything like best practice exercises or questions that could trigger such a mindset change? Because you said, like earlier, well, of course it has to become emotional, but is it that there are certain, say, questions that trigger something, or some certain exercises that you like the most?
Well, I do, and I could share those, but one of the things I'd really urge people to do is take a look at whatever the human resource policy manual is, or the employee manual. We wrote an article not too long ago that said, if you want to decide if this is a company you want to work for, ask to see their employee handbook. Because if it's got legalese and the whole right to work, and you got to sign that you've read it even though you haven't, then you're dealing with a company that's still really worried about risk and compliance. And one of the things that's an aha for people in our workshop is we'll show them a policy that they may have read when they started the company. Let me take one of them. Not the progressive discipline, but there's usually every company has standards of conduct or something like that. And there's a list of all the bad things people might do. You know, I'll say things like no horseplay, no sleeping on the job, no bringing weapons to work, no, and then if somebody brings a weapon that hasn't been well defined, we'll add that. And then at the very bottom it says, and any other thing that isn't helpful. Well, people aren't going to do that, except for the bad apple who's going to read that and see how many of them he can check off. It's a thinking that's a focus on risk mitigation and the bad apples. So I think look at a handbook, see what your policies are. Are they written for the abuser, or are they written for the vast majority of people? Is the tone one that's adult? Is the tone one of expectations, or is the tone one of rules? I think that's something that everybody can do to look at what exists in their own organization. I had a family member who's part of a new startup company say, well, there's three of us, but you know, our operations manager wants to create a handbook. And I said that, well, there's three of you, and you need a handbook for what? You know, this thought that we have that we've got to have all this structure and bureaucracy, it just isn't necessary. I've worked with a team of remote people who I love, who work their tails off, that do everything they can to support this company. I've never wondered about how many days were they taking off, or what their vacation might be, or those kinds of things. We don't have a policy manual at all. Now there may be some companies, because they're publicly traded, have to have certain policies in place for compliance regulations. That's fine. Even those policies you can word as expectations, not don't do this, or you'll be subject to further disciplinary action up to and including termination. You know, I mean, that's the phrase you find in most of those handbooks. So I would do that. I would do that. I would ask my group of leaders, are we focusing on the bad apples, the few bad apples, or are we focusing on the vast majority of our good people, and what are we doing for them? And I don't mean recognition programs and things like that. I mean empowerment. I mean, if there's a problem, do we give them the latitude to take steps to solve it? It's very scary in a high performance workplace as people take on more and more responsibilities as team members. There is a need for less management. So I can understand why that would be worrisome to some managers. But the group that we could probably cut out are middle managers if we had much higher expectations for the frontline leaders.
Excellent example. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we actually do run out of time. And the question is, like, if people still have any questions, how can they reach you?
Oh, please just write to me at Sue@hpwpgroup.com.
Okay, great. And I know that you also sent me some additional material. I will have them available on LinkedIn. So next week we'll not talk about fear, we'll not talk about death, but actually we'll talk about joy as a business driver for excellence. And Richard Sheridan of Menlo Innovations, he will be joining us. And that too promised to be a wonderful session. So once again, Sue, thank you so much for being a part of this dialogue. I truly appreciate it. I learned a great deal. I hope everyone else did too. And it would be great to see you all again then next week.
Love what you're doing, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Thomas.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sue.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.